Our third speaker this afternoon is Michael J. Cohen, Senior Research Associate of the Pacific Institute, who will speak to us about mining for data, the search for information on groundwater conditions and use in the Colorado River border region. Mr. Cohen's work focuses on water use in the lower Colorado River Basin and Delta region and the restoration of the Salton Sea ecosystem. He is the lead author of 3 Pacific Institute reports on the Salton Sea and the Colorado River Delta, and has contributed to several Pacific Institute reports on water use, including the highly regarded report, The World's Water, 2008 to 2009. He is also the co-author of several journal articles on water and the environment in the border region. He is a member of the International Boundary and Water Commission's Colorado River Delta Advisory Committee and the Water Education Foundation's Colorado River Advisory Committee.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Mr. Riley for inviting me out here and Mr. Simon for organizing this. I'm here, I guess, at the end of the day, and I'm talking about the Colorado River Delta, which I think is a nice synchronicity. Really what I'm going to do is provide a little bit of a case study, let you guys know where we're working in, what particularly we're using the data for, and what we're trying to drive. So a little bit about the Pacific Institute. We're based in Oakland, California. I used to spend a lot of time in Linda's water archives back in Berkeley. In my early years when I was still out in Oakland, I actually now live out here in Colorado, which is far better than California. Pacific Institute does a lot of work on water issues, freshwater issues. We do some work on environmental justice. We're a small nonprofit, about 20 people. About 80 to 90% of our funding comes from grants. We're almost entirely supported by private foundation. We do a little bit of consulting work, but certainly nothing on the scale of what Robert was talking about. Our website has a lot of information. Most of our reports are simply available and are posted for free. The idea is to get the information out there. We also do this report, a biennial report called The World's Water, which we compile data from around the world, looking at freshwater resource use. So what I'm going to talk about is the Colorado River, particularly the Colorado River Delta, the end of the river. Here's a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. And the question that my current research is looking at is what's going on with groundwater in this one small stretch of the Delta. Talk a little bit about the data sources, some data limitations and problems we're having with the data, and then some next steps. My hope is to avoid getting too much jargon in here. Sadly, this is what I do all the time, so if I'm starting talking about things that you're all glazing over, and I actually see you glazing over, raise your hand and say, clarify this, or let me know what you're actually talking about. So here's an old map of the Colorado River Basin. It's about 250,000 square miles. I'm not sure if we saw this earlier today, but waters in the Colorado River support more than 30 million people. However, most of that water actually goes out of the basin, or the people live outside the basin. The majority of those are, in fact, out in LA and San Diego. Roughly 19 million people or more are taking Colorado River water. Not all their needs are met by Colorado River water, but a fair portion of their water needs are met by the river. And what I'm looking at in particular is this area in red, the Colorado River Delta. Colorado River Delta is about, or used to be, about 1% of the total basin. So one thing about this map, this is an old reclamation map showing the basin covering the 7 states in the United States. And what's often forgotten is that there are 2 states in Mexico that also depend on the states of Sonora and Baja California. So this next map from 1974 from the Bureau of Reclamation, you'll note that somehow the basin, which it says Colorado River Basin, in fact, is just the Colorado River Basin in the United States because somehow the basin ends right at the border. John Wesley Powell, I think, was talking about the importance of drawing political boundaries based on basin boundaries, but that hasn't happened. It certainly didn't happen in the Colorado River Basin. The small inset now, it's just for point of comparison, is the Delaware River Basin, which is about 8% of the size by land area of the Colorado River, but the total water discharge is the same, roughly 15 million acre feet of water per year. So here's Reclamation's more updated map. This is essentially their current map. All their current reports include this map. Once again, it doesn't really extend the basin into Mexico. It does at least have the courtesy of saying Upper Colorado River Basin, Lower Colorado River Basin, which are essentially political distinctions under the law of the river for the United States, again ignoring what's happening down in Mexico. And what's happening down in Mexico is interesting to a number of people, including Brian Owen. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is an old map by Godfrey Sykes. This map came out in 1937. And this is the Colorado River Delta region. Delta region, again, is about 1% of the total basin. It's about 3,000 square miles. And essentially the basin is the Grand Canyon in reverse. So what we're seeing here is this kind of slightly diagonal line that the basin filled is the upper Gulf of California. In some places, the sediments in this trough are 5,000 feet deep. So as the Colorado River, with its tremendous power, carved away not only the Grand Canyon, but multiple canyons throughout the basin, those sediments travel downstream, which is what rivers used to do. And it filled up its delta. So an interesting portion of this is a satellite map, actually back from about 1997, because there was more water back then. But just to compare the two, you'll see that the outlines are essentially the same. What's happened is the delta vegetation that used to cover much of that area has been removed, cleared, and the land's been reclaimed for agriculture. It's very fertile soil down there, and the additional benefit of having a very reliable supply of Colorado River water, because of the tremendous infrastructure that we built on the river, allows farmers to make an order of water and get a precise amount of water delivered to that very fertile land. So we've got, this is more than 1 million acres of land that just now agricultural production, both in the United States and Mexico. And I'm going to, again, focus on one particular area of this former delta. But I want to take a step back and show you why we think this is an interesting area, an area worth saving. This is an area known as the Cienega de Santa Clara. Cienega de Santa Clara is essentially, members of the Bureau of Reclamation said essentially it was a mistake. So because of a number of treaties and minutes with Mexico regarding water quality in the lower Colorado River, at some point they started diverting very saline water from one particular irrigation district in Arizona through a canal. And then instead of building the canal an additional 25 or so miles to discharge it to the upper Gulf of California, they simply stopped building the canal into an old flat. And what happened is when you add water to this area, as in many areas, life happens. And that's exactly what's happened here is we've got this tremendous area. It's about 40,000 acres. In total, about 14,000 acres are vegetated. And in there are a number of endangered species such as human clapper-owls. But one of the interesting things about this, and this is the main stem of the Colorado River below the last dam on the river. This is the limiter, and this is the particular focus of our study, is that simply adding water to this area, vegetation came back. So in the Cienega, the water was saltier, considerably saltier, and what you get is a lot of emergent vegetation, cattails, things like that. Along the river, it was better quality water, and simply adding water back to the river, we got natural native vegetation came back. Much of the Colorado River is choked with tamarix, which is an invasive species down here. With this addition of occasional pulse flows of water, Colorado River water, you got native vegetation back. So if you can see in the back, some of the taller trees are cottonwoods, there's a lot of willows in there. And one of the interesting things here is that without management, without outside intervention, vegetation simply came back. And with the vegetation, a number of species came back with it. So here's the study area. This is known as the limotroph. This is where you might start glazing over and saying, what's the limotroph? So the limotroph is this reach of the river where it's roughly a 23-mile reach of the river between what's called the northerly international boundary, which is at the top end of this red oval, kind of marked Andrade or Algodones, and the southerly international boundary, here labeled as San Luis and San Luis Rio Colorado, New Mexico, where the Colorado River is actually the boundary between the two countries. It's the only part of the boundary between the United States and Mexico where the Colorado River is actually the boundary. As we heard a little bit before, rivers move. One of the problems with the Colorado River here is that the Colorado River has moved considerably since 1973 when this boundary was drawn. Typically, the limotroph reach is considered to be 24 miles, but actually more recent analysis suggests that it's 23 miles or less because there's less water. The river simply meander. So a little more context here before we dig deeper. On the right side of the map, To the east of the river, essentially, is Yuma. You can see the city of Yuma on the top, roughly 100,000 people. The city of San Luis, Colorado, Mexico is on the order of 400,000, 500,000 people. And then there's a number of smaller towns, essentially, in there. Roughly 53,000 acres of land are irrigated on the U.S. side in the Yuma Valley and Yuma Mesa areas. Interestingly, they're applying more than 10 acre-feet of water per acre there. That's a staggering amount of water. We'll see the impacts of that in a second. They have very senior water rights, as Justice Hawkins mentioned. Seniority plays a great role in what you can do with your water, how much water is available to you. Their water rights are very senior. And so they're applying 10 feet per acre, which is a lot of water on the western side of the river. Unfortunately, this image didn't come out as clearly, but in some of these satellite images, you can see that the fields of the United States are very verdant green. On the Mexican side, they're far less verdant because there's far less water. Mexico gets its 1.5 million acre feet under treaty, and it's always receives 1.5 million acre feet per treaty. But that's not enough water for the 500,000 acres of land irrigated in the Mexicali Valley, plus the cities of Mexicali, San Luis, Rio, Colorado, and actually some water is also exported over to Tijuana, Mexican cities on the coast. So Mexico pumps roughly an additional 50% more groundwater. What had happened historically is that before the upper basin used its full, or when the upper basin was using less than before the lower basin used its full apportionment, and when the reservoirs were full, periodically there would be flood pulses down the river. Mexico essentially has no storage. They simply have no surface storage. So some of that water would actually flow past the last dam on the river, which is right underneath Algodones there, the label Algodones. And that water would flow down the limiter of it farther down, and occasionally made it to the upper Gulf of California. And that some of that water helped recharge the aquifers in Mexico. But what's happened recently is reservoir levels have been drawn down. There's much less water going down. The U.S., through various efforts, trying to tighten up the screws, increase efficiency in the system, which means less water makes it down to this threatened reach. So what really caught our interest is represented by this particular map, which shows the changes in elevation of the water table. So you can see that for most of the Yuma Valley, water elevation has been pretty stable. In fact, some areas around Yuma, this yellowish color, water elevations have actually gone up. In fact, there's something called the groundwater mound under parts of Yuma. Bureau of Reclamations had to go in and start pumping additional groundwater because it's causing problems with the crops. It's been flooding people's basements, things like that. But what is of interest to us is this kind of yellow target, if you'll see, at the southerly international boundary, essentially where the river crosses the southern boundary. Groundwater elevations have dropped more than 20 feet in 5 years. So the environmental community has been working for more than 15 years getting restoration projects in this area and trying to dedicate some stream flows to the area. But the question arose, if groundwater elevations are dropping so fast, even if you add water to the system, allow water to flow past Morelos Dam, if there's this big groundwater hole in there, the sandy soils are something to absorb the water. So the question posed to me was, what's happening there? What are the trends? So what are the key factors? And that essentially is really the project I've been working on. So data sources, I've been looking for data from a number of different sources. Bureau of Reclamation has been a key contributor to data. Bureau of Reclamation posts some of the data, I'm going to get to that in a second, showing some of the differences in posted data and actually archived data. International Boundary and Water Commission is composed of U.S. and Mexican sections. They maintain a number of stream gauges along the river, have some additional monitoring wells. USGS, we've heard quite a bit about, have a number of monitoring wells in the area, as well as additional stream gauge data. Arizona Department of Water Resources also has some wells down in the area, which problems with, let me talk about Arizona Department of Water Resources. I'm not sure how many of you are actually from Arizona. Anybody from Arizona? Arizona, the rest of you, is in trouble. Arizona's Department of Water Resources, I believe, has been cut back by more than 2/3. The staff has been reduced by more than 2/3 in the state of Arizona. So what used to be a fairly robust Department of Water Resources, with a lot of staff and ability to respond to data requests on what's happening with Arizona water, You go to their website now, and they simply say, due to staffing requests, well, let's say good luck, but the subtext is good luck. So there's some information there, but if you can't actually find that information online, it's very difficult to dig in and to find somebody who can find that for you. CNA is Groundwater, which is the Mexican Water Resources Agency. I did a different study almost 10 years ago now, in which we actually hired somebody, a Mexican national who used to work for CNA, had him actually go in to the CNA archives, talk to some of his old friends, take out some of their archive books, and hand copy some of the data. So I had data through basically 2001 when he last retrieved some of that data, but getting more recent data has proven to be a challenge. That data is very difficult to acquire. And so one of the interesting challenges here has really been doing a study that straddles the border, so having data from Mexico and the United States. And there's a university down in northern Baja that's been doing some studies, and we're working with them a little bit. Getting data from them has been far easier than getting data from the Mexican federal agency. So this is just to point out the difference between posted data and some of the archive data. So I just mentioned that Bureau of Reclamation maintains a website, YOMS, it's the Unit Area Water Management System. That data is posted online. And in fact, somebody was looking at the data and saw, wow, that water table is really going up and down quite quickly. So the y-axis is simply depth to groundwater. And you'll see that in essentially mid to late June of this year, water table elevations reportedly were going down 14 feet on a daily basis, which raised some questions about data accuracy. So I contacted Bureau of Reclamation. They also maintain this essentially monthly monitoring this exact same well. So the essentially red dots above the yellow line are recorded data that Bureau of Reclamation maintains. That's the data they sent me. And they said the red data, the red dot data, is suitable for analysis. The yellow data, which is what they continue to post online, is not suitable for analysis. So it quickly became apparent that quality of the data, which Robert mentioned, is a key problem or a key challenge. And sorting out what data is useful and what data is not, why they're even posting data this is so bad, is an interesting question. It does attract people's attention, but it doesn't seem to reflect underlying physical conditions. USGS, their stream gauges essentially are often called the gold standard, but reported accuracy of some of these gauges is still pretty, it's high, but it's not perfect. So we're still looking at measurement error of 10% or greater with many of these gauges. The intake of relish dam is simply Mexico diverts water delivered to it. So part of what I was looking at was simply how much water is flowing below the dam. There are no gauges between Morelos Dam and the last gauging station on the river, which is about 21 miles downstream. So I tried to calculate that, but again, there's some significant data error with reported data and calculating that from the two gauges upstream, which is really at the heart of the challenge here, is that there are these data errors. There's also conflicting data. As I listed earlier, some of the data sources, Arizona Department of Water Resources, USGS, Bureau of Reclamation, and IBWC, all report data sometimes for the exact same well. Unfortunately, that same data, that same well, is reporting different data, often on the same day. My little shop, which is me, doesn't really have the budget to fly down here and go through and calibrate the wells. So we can't go back in time and look at the problems with these different wells. So I've got conflicting data sets. Mexico also measures some of this data. Mexico measures what's called static wellheads. Once a year, they turn up all the wells, almost all the federal wells in the Mexicana Valley, allow the water table to re-equilibrate for a couple of days, and then they measure the water table elevations of those wells. However, on the U.S. side, just on the other side of the river, they're simply dynamic water table elevation measurements. So they're measuring it even though perhaps right next to that same well, there's a pump pumping that water. So on one side of the river, you have a better sense of what the actual water table elevation is, but on the other side, you could just have a coded depression related to that particular well or to that particular pump reported by a different well. Also, there's been a lot of data gaps for various reasons, reclamation was able to actually go out and maintain some of these wells. Sometimes there are simply errors in transcription. This is USGS, they're not going through the data to the same degree of the same accuracy. So I have a big database from these CNA wells with geographic coordinates for these wells, and I plotted a couple of those wells wound up in the Atlantic. Also not as helpful. And one of the key challenges here is that these are not direct measurements. So what we're particularly interested in is how do these changing water table elevations affect potential for restoration projects along the river. But these wells are actually not along. They're along. One of the main sources of data is along a canal in the United States, which in some cases is 5 miles or more, and then 15 or 20 or 30 feet higher than the riparian corridor itself. So some challenges exist. This background image is simply the Colorado River many times below the last dam. So, and just to demonstrate that last point, these are some of these monitoring wells indicated with or labeled above. The green is the approximate elevation of the riparian corridor, what we're really interested in. And then the blue line is the end of 2009 approximate elevation of the water table. So what we're interested in is how deep is the water table relative to the riparian corridor, because many of these native plants can only go 10, 15 feet deep. Once the roots really don't extend much beyond that. They get stressed if the water table drops below that for a considerable period, these trees are going to die. So one of the questions was, what's going on in the region? Why is the water table drop? I showed you that earlier map showing the significant decline in the lower portion of the literature of what's causing it. So along the border, a little bit to the east of that particular point, there's something known as the regulatory or protected regulatory pumping unit. So on both sides of the border, the United States and Mexico are limited essentially by treaty to the amount of water they can extract within essentially a 5-mile zone on either side of the border. And this is simply from 1975 through 2009, total pumping. The lower lighter column is pumping by Mexico, and the green above it is pumping by the United States. And you can see 1997, 98, 99, there's a fair amount of water in the Colorado River. What happened was Mexico essentially turned off its pumps. The United States still pumped a little bit, but then entering the most recent decade, Mexico's pumping has gone way out in the past couple of years. Mexico's pumping has approached its treaty limit, and the United States pumping has also increased over time to that extent. The other thing that's happening is flows along the Colorado River have decreased significantly. So the NIB is this upper portion of the limit road, and these peaks essentially are the United States meeting its treaty obligations. We're doing it at almost 1.5 million acre feet along the main stem. And the green essentially is this SIB, this hole that we're looking at. So you can see in the early part of the decade, there were occasional peak flows. Some water made it past, either it rained in the Imperial Valley or for whatever other reason. Some water made it past the dam, flowed down the river, and some of that percolated into the ground and maintained the water table. But you can see in 2006, 2007, and again in 2009, there was zero reported discharge at the SIB. Colorado was completely dry. So this is a different way to look at it. So the histogram looking at flows on a daily basis. So the earlier, that 2000 through 2004, that 5-year period, more than 20% of days showed no flow. Colorado was dry 20% of the time. But the darker red, the brick red, is this period from 2005 through 2009. Essentially the same number of days. More than 90% of the days, there was no flow at all in the Colorado River. It was completely dried up. So one of the key findings, and this is still, this study is still in process, is that these surface loads, drying up of the surface loads, seems to be a root cause, because if there's surface water, then Mexico's pumping less as well. As surface loads have dried up, that seems to be the trend for the future. Water table is declining, and it may simply indicate that certain portions of the limit road, perhaps the last 25% of the limit road, those water tables are not going to recover. And it's going to be difficult to have any kind of sustainable restoration effort in that last 25% of the trough. The good news is that the upper 75%, the water table still seems reasonably good. And part of that is because there's still this tremendous amount of irrigation on the humid side of the border. Some of that water flows below the ground surface into that upper portion of the river. In some areas, still seems to maintain some base flows, which suggests that there's opportunities there for riparian restoration. But in the lower portion, that last 25%, we may simply be faced with the prospect of either writing it off or towards what's done in other portions of the lower Colorado River, which is simply intensive irrigation, tree farms, which are certainly not nearly as exciting or as attractive, but it does maintain trees. There's some question as to whether we should pursue a groundwater model. As we heard just a moment ago, this is an incredibly expensive prospect. It's very data intensive. It's complicated because the data isn't very good. There have been some groundwater models in the past, but a lot of those were looking at different things. They were looking at the groundwater map. They were not focused on restoration efforts. Some of them had some arbitrary boundaries. They simply said water elevation on the boundaries are static, which may be useful for looking at a groundwater map or UMA, but it certainly doesn't help us when we're looking at those boundaries themselves. Or we may simply say that we're going to look at this upper portion of the trough from sort of restoration there. And then the question then becomes, as negotiations continue between the United States and Mexico, in which some members of the environmental community have participated, what level or what volume of in-stream flows are required to maintain some of this upstream habitat, and how is the timing of those releases important? And then this is just a nice quote. And this image is lower down on the Colorado River. It's actually part of the Rio Grande, which is a tributary again, fed by ag drainage down in such a lower part of the delta. And you can still see that there's a fair amount of water in the system, but there's this good portion of 40 miles or so of the river, which is dry on a regular basis. Thanks.